Hello, my name is Valeria. This is my new original story on my channel. Subscribe and enjoy.
The Alpha King stopped the entire feast, stood up for a waitress. No one in the hall could breathe. The tray was heavier than it looked. Nora had been carrying trays for 4 years at Veldmore Keep, and she had learned early that the weight of a thing and its appearance had very little to do with each other. A silver platter stacked with roasted game and glazed root vegetables could weigh enough to make her shoulders ache by the third crossing of the hall. A single ceramic cup filled with warmed wine could feel like nothing at all. But the heaviest thing she had ever carried inside these stone walls was not made of silver or clay. It was the particular weight of being unseen. She had become very good at it, at existing in the spaces between important people without disturbing the air they breathed, at moving along the edges of rooms where decisions were made, where territories were staked, where the future of 7 packs was arranged over long wooden tables and tall cups of dark wine. Her footsteps had a rhythm to them now, measured and soundless on cold stone. Her eyes had a fixed point, always at shoulder height, never at anyone's face. Her expression was the expression of a person who was not, technically, a person in this room. She was a function, a service, a pair of hands that delivered and disappeared. She was 22 years old, and she had built an entire life out of the skill of not mattering. Her name was Nora, but no one in the hall knew that. The night of the Great Convergence was the largest gathering held at Veldmore in 3 years. Every major pack sent its alpha, or its senior representative. The hall had been dressed for it since dawn. Black iron candelabras were carried in from storage and positioned along the central aisle, each fitted with a dozen thick candles that cast a warm amber light across the vaulted ceiling. The long tables had been covered in dark linen, embroidered at the edges with the silver wolf crest of the keep. The kitchens had been working since before sunrise, and the smell that drifted through the corridors, roasted meat, warm bread, pine resin from the torches, was so dense and layered that Nora had stopped tasting it 3 hours into her shift. By the time the guests arrived, she was already exhausted in the way that had nothing to do with sleep, the kind of exhaustion that settles in the chest and stays there. She had been assigned to the eastern corridor of tables, the section that ran closest to the raised platform at the head of the hall. Her supervisor, a compact and efficient woman named Rael, had chosen her for this position for the same reasons she always did. Nora was steady. She did not flinch. She did not stare. She could pass within arm's reach of the most powerful wolves on the continent and leave no impression behind her. Not a sound, not a shifted gaze, not a single disturbance in the particular social order that made these gatherings possible. She was useful precisely because she was invisible. Rael had said it plainly on Nora's first day at the keep, 4 years ago, when Nora had arrived at 17 with a single cloth bag and a letter of introduction from the village matron 3 territories south. She had said, "You will be good at this work if you understand one thing. In that hall, you are not a person. You are a service. The moment you begin to believe otherwise, you will become a problem. Do you understand?" Nora had nodded. She had understood. She had been nodding and understanding ever since. What Rael had not said, and what Nora had learned on her own over the following 4 years, was that being a service had a particular kind of cost. That the longer you practiced invisibility, the more thoroughly it worked. Not just in the hall, not just during the gatherings, but in all the spaces in between, in the narrow room behind the kitchens where she slept, in the early mornings when she carried water from the well before the hold woke, in the late evenings when she sat on the stone step outside the kitchen entrance and looked at the ridge of northern mountains going dark against the sky. The invisibility followed her there too, settled over her like a second cloak, reminded her of what she was and what she was not, with a patience that never tired. She had been, for most of her life, very good at not answering it back. The hall filled quickly once the sun went down. Nora moved between the tables in the smooth, practiced rhythm she had spent years building, refilling cups before they were empty, clearing plates before the absence of food became conspicuous, adjusting candles when the wax began to run. She noted the arrivals without appearing to look. The alpha of the iron basin came in first, tall and broad-shouldered, his pack markings visible at his throat. The alpha of the greywood followed with 3 of his senior wolves, all of them wearing the deep green cloaks of their territory. The Ashenvale delegation arrived together, 5 wolves in pale grey, their expressions carrying the specific reserve of people who had been making political calculations for every waking hour of the last week. And then, between one breath and the next, a quiet moved through the hall. Not the silence of something stopping, the silence of something arriving. The Alpha King came in without ceremony. That was the thing about him that Nora had noticed on the very first night she served in this hall, 3 years ago. He did not enter a room the way powerful men usually did. He did not pause in the doorway to let his presence register, did not sweep his gaze across the assembled faces to confirm that they had noticed him. He simply walked in, and the room rearranged itself around him without being asked. His name was Kale. He ruled 7 pack territories from the Ashenvale throne in the north, and had held that position for 9 years, since he was 24, which made him the youngest Alpha King in 4 generations. He was tall, dark-haired, and broad across the shoulders, in a way that had nothing to do with the cut of his clothing. He wore black leather strapped at the chest, with a dull bronze clasp, and a heavy mantle across his shoulders that was not meant for display, but for the cold that came off the northern mountains, even in the middle of summer. His eyes, when they moved through a room, were the particular pale gray of winter cloud that carries something behind it. Nora had been watching the floor in front of her for 3 years, and had still managed to memorize the exact quality of the way he moved. She did not examine this too closely. He took his place at the head table on the raised platform. His 2 senior advisors settled to his left. The seat to his immediate right remained empty for a moment before a woman took it, and Nora did not have to look directly to know who she was. Lady Mara of the Ironstone line, 26 years old, from one of the oldest bloodlines in the Northern Territories. Dark hair arranged in elaborate braids pinned at the back of her head. A gown the color of deep wine that caught the torchlight and held it. She carried herself with the particular ease of someone who had never, in her entire life, been asked to make herself small. She sat at the Alpha King's right hand, as if the chair had been built specifically for her, settled her hands in her lap, and turned to say something close to his ear. He answered. Nora could not hear from where she stood. She carried a tray of filled cups toward the eastern tables, and did not think about any of it. The first hour passed without incident. The feast moved in the rhythm Nora knew. The initial quiet of unfamiliar wolves in the same enclosed space. The gradual loosening that came with warm food and strong wine. The slow rise of conversation until the hall was full of layered sound. She moved through it, as she always did, which was to say without moving through it at all. Past it, around its edges, careful not to disturb the particular social ecosystems that formed at each table. She had just cleared a set of plates from the far end of the second eastern table, and was returning with a fresh tray of wine cups when it happened. The path she took back from the serving corridor ran close to the edge of the raised platform, passing within a short distance of the high table. She had taken this path hundreds of times. She knew the spacing. She knew the angle. She knew exactly how much room existed between the edge of the platform and the table where the minor nobles sat, and she had never once come close to disturbing anyone on it. But Lady Mara had shifted her chair back, while Nora was in the serving corridor. The chair now extended several inches further than it had before, directly into the path that Nora had walked without incident for 3 years. Nora rounded the corner from the corridor and felt the edge of the chair before she saw it, the tray in her hands tilting before she could catch it, the stack of filled cups leaning. She caught the tray. She steadied it in the fraction of a second before anything fell, her grip tight, both arms compensating. Not one drop of wine left its cup. But her elbow, in the sudden correction of her balance, made contact with the back of Lady Mara's chair. Not with the woman herself. With the chair. A single point of pressure, lasting less than a breath. The hall did not stop. The conversations continued. The torches burned. But Lady Mara went very still. Then she turned, and the look on her face was a specific thing that Nora recognized the way you recognize weather changing. Not anger yet, but something that had decided to become anger. "What?" she said, and her voice was pitched to Carrie. "Do you think you are doing?" Nora steadied the tray against her forearms and took a single step back. "Forgive me. I misjudged the path. You touched my chair." Lady Mara's voice had risen by a fraction, enough that the nearest tables had shifted their attention. "An Omega servant touched my chair and is telling me she misjudged." "It was not intentional," Nora said. She kept her voice level. She had practice at this. "I offer my sincerest apology." "Your apology," Lady Mara repeated, and now she stood. The movement was deliberate. It was not the quick rising of someone reacting to surprise. It was the rising of someone who had decided on a course of action and was following it through. An Omega servant who does not know how to carry a tray in a hall she has presumably been working in for years, bumps into my seat in the middle of the king's gathering and offers me an apology. The tables nearest to the platform had gone quiet. Nora kept her gaze at shoulder height, the way Rael had taught her. She kept her arms still under the tray. She did not let anything show on her face that was not controlled and steady. "The fault was mine," she said. "It will not happen again." Lady Mara's hand came up. There was a specific moment in which everything in the hall seemed to register what was about to happen, before it happened. Not a collective gasp. Nothing so dramatic as that. But a quality of stillness that settled over the nearest 20 feet of the room. A held breath. A collective recognition that the next second would contain something that could not be taken back. Nora did not step away. She had nowhere useful to step. The tray was in her hands, and the edge of the platform was at her back, and she simply stood there and looked at Lady Mara's raised hand, and thought about nothing at all. And then, from the far end of the raised platform, came the sound of a chair being pushed back, not urgently, not dramatically, just the clean, deliberate scrape of wood on stone, a chair displaced by the weight of a person standing. The silence that followed was different from the one before it. Lady Mara's hand did not complete its arc. It stayed where it was, suspended, as the sound of footsteps moved from the head of the platform toward them. Measured footsteps, unhurried. The footsteps of a man who had never in his life needed to move quickly to command a room. Every face turned. Nora did not turn. She could not have explained why, afterward. It was not composure. It was something closer to the particular stillness that comes over a person when they understand, in some wordless way, that the world has just shifted beneath them, and that moving in any direction would be wrong. The footsteps stopped just behind her, and to her left. The Alpha King of the 7 northern packs stood in the space between Nora and the edge of his table, and he did not look at Lady Mara. He looked at Nora. If you are watching this and thinking that no story has ever held your attention like this one, you are right, and it is not finished yet. Subscribe right now, and do not miss the ending, because what happens next changes everything you think you know about this night. He looked at her, the way he might look at something he was deciding about, not with calculation, with attention. The kind of attention that is different from a gaze, because it actually registers the thing it lands on. Nora stood with her tray and her wine cups, and her 4 years of practiced invisibility, and she had no idea what to do with being seen. Nora. Her own name, said quietly, in his voice, in the middle of the silence that had descended over the nearest half of the great hall of Veldmore Keep. She went completely still in a way that was different from the stillness she had been holding a moment ago. That stillness had been the stillness of composure. This was something else. This was the stillness of a person whose name has just been said by someone who should not know it. She turned. He was closer than she had expected, not threatening, not positioned in the way of a man making a point to the room, though the room was certainly receiving one. He was simply standing there, the way he always stood, as though the ground under him was a different substance from the ground under everyone else. "Your name is Nora," he said, and it was not a question. She did not know what to say. She said the only honest thing she had. Yes. He held her gaze for a moment longer, and then he turned to Lady Mara. "Lower your hand," he said. His voice, when it was directed at Lady Mara, was not louder than it had been when it said Nora's name. That was the thing that made it carry. It was completely even. It was the voice of a man who had not raised it in so long that the question of raising it no longer occurred to him. Lady Mara's hand came down. The silence in the hall was absolute now. Even the far tables had gone still. The conversations killed off in waves as the quiet spread from the center outward. Every alpha in the room, every senior wolf, every minor noble and pack representative who had been brought here for this gathering was watching the raised platform. "This woman," the Alpha King said, and he did not gesture toward Nora, but the direction of his words was unmistakable, "carries out her work in this hall with more dignity than most of the people sitting at these tables manage in a year." She moved to avoid a collision on a path that was blocked without notice. The only error she made was apologizing for it. Lady Mara's expression had gone through several things in rapid succession, and had arrived somewhere that was carefully composed and completely cold. "With respect," she said, and the two words were doing considerable work. "She is an Omega servant who disturbed—" "She disturbed nothing," the Alpha King said. That was all. No elaboration, no continuation. Just those 3 words, and the settled weight behind them. But that was not where this evening ended. It was not where it began either. That was the thing that no one in the hall understood in that moment. That the exchange they had just witnessed was not a spontaneous act, not a king's whim, not even a response to what had happened in the last 5 minutes. It was the surface expression of something that went back 7 years, to a stretch of road in the territory south of Ashevale, and a night that Nora did not remember, and that the Alpha King had never forgotten. She did not know this yet. She was standing with her tray and her wine cups in the sudden strange visibility of a hall full of watching eyes, and the only thought she had room for was the simple, bewildering fact of her own name in his mouth. He had known her name. He had spoken it without hesitation, without consulting anyone, without the smallest pause of a man recalling something recently learned. He had said it the way you say the name of someone you have known for a long time. She could not account for it. She could not account for any of what had just happened. The Alpha Kings of the 7 northern packs did not stand at great feasts to defend the dignity of serving women. The social order of the packs was built on layers of rank and bloodline and pack standing, and at the very bottom of that order sat Omegas without pack affiliation, like Nora, who had no bloodline worth recording and no rank that appeared in any of the documents that governed life in these territories. An Omega servant and a highborn of the Ironstone line existed in such different worlds that what had just happened between the Alpha King and Lady Mara should have been impossible. And yet, it had happened. And it had happened with her name. The evening continued. It had to. These were powerful people with political reputations and territorial agreements, and the accumulated momentum of a gathering planned for 3 months. And the social contract required that the feast proceed, regardless of what had interrupted it. Conversations restarted. Wine was poured. Food arrived from the kitchens. Nora continued her work. She moved through the hall in the same pattern she had used for 4 years, but something about the pattern felt different now. Not disrupted. Not changed. Just different in the way a road feels different when you realize you have been walking it in the dark, and someone has lit a lantern somewhere behind you. She was aware of being looked at. Not constantly, not dramatically, but in the way that a room changes when it knows something about you that was not known before. The glances were quick, mostly, and some of them carried the particular quality of a recalibration, the expression of people adjusting an assumption. The senior wolves at the Ashenvale table watched her cross in front of them and did not look away in the usual way. One of the Iron Basin delegates tracked her movement from the far end of his table, not with malice, with something harder to name. She kept her tray level. She kept her eyes at shoulder height. She let none of it find purchase on her face. But her chest was doing something it had not done in a very long time, something that felt, uncomfortably, like the beginning of wanting to understand. She was in the serving corridor, stacking empty plates onto the return shelf, when she heard the footstep behind her. She knew the sound. She turned. He was standing in the entrance of the corridor, the narrow stone passage that connected the serving area to the kitchen supply room. and for a moment neither of them said anything. He had left the feast table. She did not know how long ago. She had not seen him rise. "You do not need to be uncomfortable," he said. Nora set the last plate on the shelf and turned to face him properly. She was not entirely sure what to do with her hands, a problem she had never had before. She settled on holding them still at her sides. "I am not uncomfortable," she said. He looked at her with the same attention he had used in the hall, the kind that actually registered. Then, unexpectedly, something in his expression shifted, not warmth exactly, something more precise than warmth. Recognition. "You do not remember," he said. It was not a question, and it was not an accusation. He said it with the particular evenness of a man who has had a long time to arrive at a fact, and has arrived at it without bitterness. Nora said carefully, "I am not certain what I am supposed to remember." 7 years ago, he said, the southern road between the Greywood and the Ashevale border. It was October, the first hard frost of the year. She did not answer immediately. The October of 7 years ago was not a blank in her memory. She had been 15, still in the village of Aldenmere, 3 territories south of where she now stood. There had been many evenings on the road in those years, many people who passed through the village, and whom she had helped, and whom she had forgotten, and whom the world had continued turning without recording. There was a boy, he said, alone on the road after dark, in weather that was going to kill him before morning. He had been traveling without proper rest, without sufficient clothing for the temperature, without any of the judgment that a boy of 17 in that situation should have had. He was injured. He had fallen on the road, and the cold had moved into the injury, and he was not conscious enough to be frightened, which, in its own way, was the most frightening thing about him. The serving corridor was very quiet. From the hall behind him came the layered sounds of the feast, music now, and the dense murmur of 200 conversations, and from the kitchen to her left came the warm noise of the kitchen staff at work. Here, in this narrow stone passage, it was dim and cold and very still. "A girl found him," the Alpha King said. She was 15 years old. She was small. She had been walking back from a neighboring village with a bundle of cloth her mother had asked her to collect, and she found him on the road in the dark, and she did not go past. Nora felt something shift at the back of her memory. She could not carry him, he continued. She tried. She was too small, and he was too large, and trying cost her more than an hour. So she stayed. She built a fire at the roadside from wood she found in the dark. She wrapped her own winter cloak around him and sat against the wind to block it. She stayed with him until a traveling merchant's cart came through at dawn, and she stopped it and convinced the merchant, who did not want to be involved, to take the boy to the nearest settlement. Something was opening inside her that she did not have a name for, not memory yet. Something adjacent to memory. The cold of that October, the smell of the road, a boy she had not recognized, face slack and gray in the firelight, and the particular decision she had made, silently, without deliberation, that she was not going to leave him there alone. The boy had no pack markings on him, the Alpha King said. He was traveling under a false name. He had made a very poor decision about a shortcut through contested territory, and the decision had cost him more than he expected. He woke up in a settlement 3 territories from home, with 2 ribs broken, a healed wound in his side, and a story he was not supposed to have been anywhere near. He paused. when he asked about the girl who had found him, the merchant said she had walked the rest of the way home without her cloak. Nora stood in the serving corridor and felt the pieces arrange themselves in the space behind her sternum, with the slow, irreversible weight of a thing that has always been true and has only just been named. She looked at him, at the broad shoulders and the pale gray eyes and the scar along his left jaw that she had noticed on her first day at Veldmore Keep, and had not known, had not imagined, had no framework for imagining where it had come from. She thought about the boy on the road, the injury that had been a wound, not a fall, the cold that had been working on him in the way the cold worked on people who could no longer generate their own warmth. "That was you," she said. "That was me," he said. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the narrow room behind the kitchens that she shared with the other 2 serving women who worked the late shift, and she listened to the sounds of the keep settling around her, the distant creak of the hall cooling, the wind off the northern ridge pressing against the shuttered windows, and she stared at the ceiling and could not make any of it settle into an arrangement she knew how to carry. 4 years. She had been carrying trays in this hall for 4 years. She had moved past his table hundreds of times. She had poured his wine on the nights when she was assigned to the high table circuit. She had been close enough on those evenings to hear the texture of his voice as he spoke to his advisors, close enough that the candlelight caught the bronze clasp at his chest, and she had looked through him the way she looked through everything and everyone in that room, because that was what she had trained herself to do, because that was what the work required, and all that time he had known her name. He had known who she was. That was what she could not put down. Not the story he had told, as stunning as it was. The recognition of the boy on the road. The understanding of where those particular 4 years of her life had aimed her. At this keep, at this hall, at a version of herself who had learned invisibility so thoroughly that she had walked the corridors of the castle, of the man she had once kept alive, and neither of them had spoken of it for years. That she could, with time, have carried. What she could not carry, lying in the dark with the northern wind at the shutters, was the specific knowledge that all along there had been someone in this hall who knew she existed as more than a function, who knew her name. She pressed her palm flat against the cold stone wall beside her bed and breathed until her chest stopped doing the thing it had been doing since the serving corridor, which was an aching that felt, disconcertingly, like the reverse of loneliness, like the space that loneliness had hollowed out in her, year by year, breath by breath, was suddenly, and without warning, full of something else, and her body did not yet know how to hold it. The morning came gray and cold. She tied her apron strings in the dim corridor behind the kitchen and went to work. She thought, walking to the hall with her first tray of the day, that perhaps the previous night would remain in its own sealed space, that this keep was a large place, and he was an alpha king with 100 claims on every hour, and that the conversation in the serving corridor had been the kind of thing that happened once, and then became part of the structure of the world, without requiring anything further from either person in it. She had done something for a boy on a road 7 years ago. He had protected her name and her dignity in a hall full of witnesses. The debt was settled, if it had ever been a debt, and everyone would continue as before. She almost believed it. She was on her 3rd crossing of the hall, early morning, before the other servants had arrived, and while the hall was still being set for the day, when she heard her name again, She turned. He was standing at the entrance to the hall, not in the fine clothing of the feast, but in something plainer, dark wool, no cloak, which meant he had come from the interior of the keep, rather than from outside. He was alone, which was unusual. Alpha Kings at a gathering of this kind did not typically move through the holds without at least one advisor behind them. "There is something I should have told you last night," he said, and did not. She waited, holding her empty tray at her side. "I knew you were here," he said, "when I came to Veldmore 4 years ago, for the first convergence after I took the throne, and you were assigned to serve the Eastern tables. I recognized you. I have known, for 4 years, where you were." The hall around her was still. The early light came through the high windows at an angle that caught the dust in the air and made it visible. "I did not say anything," he said. "I told myself it was because you were building something here, and I did not want to disrupt it. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. The full truth is that I watched you work for 4 years, and every time I saw what you had become in this place, the skill and the care and the particular way you carry yourself, I did not want to be the person who changed what you were here, because you were something complete and entirely your own, and I did not think I had the right to put myself into that." She thought about that for a moment. "And last night," she said, "last night she raised her hand," he said simply. There was nothing complicated in the way he said it, no performance of justification, no construction of an argument, just a plain statement of cause and a plain statement of effect, and between them the exact contour of a line he had been watching for 4 years without crossing, and had crossed the moment it became necessary. Nora looked at him across the quiet morning hall, at the man who had known her name for 4 years, and kept it carefully in exactly the place she had left it. And she did not know what word she would have chosen for what she was feeling in that moment, but she knew it was not small, and she knew it was not something she wanted to practice, not feeling. "I should have told you sooner that I knew," he said, "not because it would have changed anything about your work here, only because you deserved to know that there was one person in this room who saw you." She was quiet for a moment. "You are doing it again," she said then. He looked at her, something shifting at the corner of his expression. "What am I doing?" "Telling me a true thing without asking what I think about it." His expression changed then, not dramatically. A very small thing at the edge of it, something that existed only in the slight adjustment of the lines around his eyes, and it was the most human thing she had seen on his face. "What do you think about it?" he said. She thought about it honestly, the way she had learned in this hall to be honest with herself about things that mattered, in the privacy of her own chest where no one could see. "I think," she said, "that I am glad you knew. And I think I would have wanted to know sooner. And I think I will need time to hold both of those things at once, because they do not fit easily together." He nodded. Slowly, the way a person nods when they are not agreeing with a simplified version of something, but with the actual complexity of it. "That is fair," he said. "It is not about fairness," she said. "It is about being honest." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, those are different things." "They are," she said, but there was still the matter of the hall. She understood this. She had spent 4 years in rooms where 7 packs negotiated their relationships with each other, and she understood the architecture of how things were interpreted, how a single gesture rippled out from its point of origin, and change the shape of every alliance and assumption it touched. What the Alpha King had done the previous night was not invisible. It had been witnessed by every significant wolf in the Northern Territories. The question of what it meant, of what it indicated about the king's intentions and the king's choices, had already been spreading through the corridors of Veldmore since before the hall went cold. She did not have to imagine this. She knew, because Rael had appeared at her room door before dawn, tight-lipped and measuring, to tell her that there had been words exchanged between 3 of the senior pack representatives after the feast, and that the Alpha of the Iron Basin, whose daughter had been brought to this gathering with specific hopes attached to the visit, had requested an audience with the king's advisor before the morning's first session. She knew because 2 of the serving women she worked alongside had looked at her differently at breakfast, and one of them had said, quietly, without either warmth or coldness, just the plain statement of someone reading a situation, that she should be careful. And she knew, because she had been in this hall long enough to understand, that visible things had consequences, and that the king had made her visible in a room full of people who had spent a great deal of time and political capital arranging the world so that someone like her remained the opposite. The morning session of the Convergence was the formal one, where the previous night's feast had been the social architecture of the gathering, the shared table that established the fact of alliance before the content of it could be discussed. The morning session was where the actual shape of things was decided. Territories, responsibilities, trade agreements, the succession of held lands, and the management of border disputes that had been accumulating since the last gathering. Nora was not supposed to be in the hall during the morning session. Her assignment was the preparation of the afternoon meal and the arrangement of the serving stations for the second evening, and she had work to do that would occupy her until midday without difficulty. She was in the corridor outside the kitchen supply room, counting linen, when she heard the doors of the great hall open and the sound of several sets of footsteps moving with the particular weighted purpose of wolves who were going somewhere with an intention. She did not move toward the sound, but she heard what came through the stone walls of the corridor clearly enough. It cannot stand. That was a voice she recognized as belonging to the Alpha of the Iron Basin, a man named Gordon, whose accent carried the flat vowels of the Eastern Territories. An Alpha King does not stand before a highborn representative of an allied line and defend a servant girl. He does not say her name in front of the assembly. Whatever the personal circumstance, the political reading of what happened in this hall last night cannot be managed quietly if it is allowed to continue. A pause. What you saw last night, the Alpha King's voice, was me addressing conduct that would have damaged the gathering. Nothing that happened requires your management. Kale. A second voice, older, the measured tone of a man who had been managing political situations for a very long time. His senior advisor, she thought. What Alpha Gordon is saying. I heard what he said. What he is saying is that the assembly has drawn a conclusion, and that conclusion, regardless of what you intended, is one that has implications for the alliances this gathering was convened to renew. Lady Mara's family is... Lady Mara raised her hand against a woman who had offered an apology for something that was not her fault, the Alpha King said, and his voice had not risen, not even slightly. In the middle of this hall, in front of every pack that sent a representative to this gathering, I am comfortable with the message that action sent. Comfortable. Alpha Gordon's voice had taken on a texture that was not quite anger. "You are comfortable. You are a king, Kale. You do not get to be comfortable. You get to be strategic." A long pause. "Those are not the same thing," said another voice from the room, lower than the others. A woman's voice, older still, and carrying something in it that made the corridor go a degree quieter in Nora's hearing. She did not know who that was. "They are not," the Alpha King agreed, "and I have generally found that when the choice is between them, the one that produces better outcomes over time is not the one that your definition of strategic recommends." Silence. Nora pressed her back against the stone wall of the corridor and held her linen very still. "The girl," Gordon said. "What is she to you?" Another pause. Not a hesitant one, a deliberate one. "She is the reason I am standing here," the Alpha King said. She heard the silence that followed that statement and felt it in her sternum. 7 years ago, he continued, and his voice had not changed in character, but had become very precise. "I made a serious error in judgment about a route through contested territory. I was 17 years old, overconfident, and undertrained in exactly the ways that I did not know I was undertrained. I was injured in a way that, combined with exposure on a night when the temperature went below freezing, would have resulted in my death. I was found on a road in the Greywood territory by a girl who was 15 years old, carrying a bundle of cloth, and who had no earthly obligation to stop. She stopped. She spent the night on the road in temperatures that damaged her hands, which I did not know until later, because she gave me her cloak. And in the morning, she stopped a passing merchant's cart and talked him into taking me to safety. And then she walked home in the cold, without her cloak, and she never told anyone what she had done." The corridor was absolutely still. "She did not know who I was," he said. "I had no markings on me that she could have read. She did not help a prince. She did not help a future king. She helped a person who would otherwise have died on a road, and she did it without calculating what it might return to her, and she did it so quietly that she apparently forgot about it inside a year." Another silence, different from the others. "I did not forget," he said. Nora was sitting on the stone step outside the kitchen entrance, the one she sat on in the evenings sometimes, when the hall had gone quiet, and she needed to feel the cold air on her face, when the door behind her opened. She did not look up. The sound of footsteps, and then the scrape of someone lowering themselves to sit on the step beside her. She looked over. It was not the Alpha King. It was the woman with the older voice from the hall. She was perhaps 60, silver-haired, with the particular posture of someone who had spent a long time carrying themselves with precision, and for whom it had become effortless. Her eyes, when she turned them on Nora, were a clear amber, and they held in them the same kind of attention that she had encountered only twice before, once in the serving corridor, and once in the morning hall. "My name is Sale," the woman said. "I am the Alpha King's mother." Nora looked at her. "I know," Sale said. "I am dressed very plainly for someone with that title. I find that people are more honest with me when I am." Nora did not know what to say to this, so she said the honest thing. "You were in the hall this morning." "I was," Sale said. "I have been listening to my son navigate his pack politics for 9 years. He is better at it now than he used to be, though he has always been better at it than people expect, because he does not perform it." She paused. "He is also, at the age of 31, capable of making his own choices. Which is why I am here talking to you, rather than in there telling him what to do, since the last time I tried that, he was 15, and it did not work then either. Nora found, despite everything that had happened in the last 12 hours, that something in her chest was moving toward the warmth of the woman's tone, rather than away from it. "Why are you here, then?" Sale looked at the ridge of the northern mountains, going blue in the afternoon light. "Because my son has not, in 9 years on the throne, stood up from a feast table and crossed a hall for anyone," she said. "And I thought the person he did it for might be sitting out here in the cold, wondering what it meant." Nora was quiet. "I know what it meant," she said finally. "Do you?" Sale said, not dismissively, with real curiosity. "It meant that he remembered," Nora said, "and that whatever he thought about remembering, whatever he decided to do with it over 4 years of knowing where I was, last night he decided that protecting me was more important than whatever he had decided before." Sale was quiet for a moment. "That is an accurate description," she said. "It is not a comfortable one." "No," Sale said, "it is not. Comfortable is rarely the right word for true things." A pause. "He is a careful man. He is careful because he has had to be, because the position requires it, but also because it is genuinely his nature. He does not move before he is certain, which means that when he does move, it is because something in him is certain." She turned her amber eyes toward Nora. "I thought you should know that." Nora held that for a moment. "What happened to your hands?" Sale said. Nora looked down at her hands. She had stopped noticing the scars years ago, the way you stop noticing the permanent things. The pale lines across the backs of both hands, above the knuckle line, where the frostbite from a night on the road when she was 15 had left its permanent record in her skin. She had told the village healer she had been careless with kindling. She had never told anyone the truth of where the cold had come from. "Old damage," she said. "Yes," Sale said quietly. "My son described them. He has described them, in fact, at least once a year for 7 years. Whenever the question of that night came up between us, he has described them very precisely." Nora looked at the mountains. There was something in being seen that she had not expected. She had thought of it, in the abstract, as an exposure, as the uncomfortable sensation of having the carefully maintained boundaries of your invisibility dissolved without your consent. She had thought of it as vulnerability, but sitting on the stone step in the afternoon cold, with the northern mountains going blue ahead of her, and a woman beside her who had amber eyes and silver hair, and the particular quality of a person who says true things plainly, she found that being seen did not feel like exposure. It felt like the morning light in the hall, coming through the high windows at an angle that caught the dust in the air and made it visible, made all the small floating particles of an ordinary space suddenly apparent, suddenly present, suddenly real. She had been in this hall 4 years. She had been real the entire time. She had just not, until recently, been given reason to believe that anyone else could tell. Sale stayed on the step beside her for a while longer. They did not talk about politics, or about what the morning session had contained, or about what any of it meant for the gathering or the territories, or the specific complicated web of pack alliances that had been assembled in the great hall over the last 2 days. They talked about small things, the way the northern light changed in the hour before sunset, the variety of bread, that the cook at Veldmore made on cold mornings, that was unlike anything either of them had found elsewhere. The way the mountains looked in the first snowfall of the season, which was still some weeks away, but already present in the quality of the air. It was the easiest conversation Nora had had in 4 years. She thought about that afterward, about the fact that a woman who was the Alpha King's mother, who had spent decades in the inner circle of the most powerful political machinery in the Northern Territories, was the first person at Veldmore with whom she had simply talked, without performing invisibility, without managing the specific social geometry of being a serving woman in a hall full of people who did not see her, not see. Just 2 people on a cold step with the mountains ahead of them, and the warmth of the kitchen at their backs, talking about bread and light and snow. It told her something. She was not entirely sure what it told her, but it settled in her chest alongside everything else that had settled there since the previous night, becoming part of the new and considerable weight of a life that was, without her having planned for it, in the process of becoming different. After Sale went back inside, Nora remained on the step for a while longer. She thought about the road in October, 7 years ago. She had not thought about it in a long time, not because she had deliberately set it aside, but because the mind naturally moves away from things that do not seem to lead anywhere, and a night she had spent keeping a stranger alive on a frozen road had not, in all the years since, appeared to connect to anything that followed. It had simply been a night she had spent, a choice she had made, the way she made most choices, without calculation, because the alternative was to walk past someone who was going to die if she did, and she did not know how to be a person who did that. She had not thought of it as significant. She had not thought of it as anything other than the thing that had happened, and the thing she had done, and the cold that had remained in her hands for several weeks afterward, and the mild fever that had come and gone by the time the healer saw her, and the new cloak her mother had made her, without asking too many questions about what had happened to the old one. She had been 15. She had thought about it the way you think about things at 15, which is to say completely, and then not at all, the intensity of the experience absorbing fully into the texture of a life that kept moving. He had been 17, and he had, apparently, thought about it every year since. She found she needed to sit with that for a while before she could move. They do not end stories like this with declarations. That was something Nora came to understand as the days after the convergence settled into the shape of what came next. Life in the great keeps of the northern packs was not a place where grand gestures could survive very long without the weight of ordinary reality coming down around them, and the ordinary reality of Veldmore Keep in the weeks following the gathering was both very large and very specific. There were, to begin with, the pack politics. The Iron Basin Alpha's complaint had been formally raised and formally answered. The answer had been given without apology and without explanation beyond what the Alpha King had already provided, and the outcome of that conversation, which Nora learned in the sideways manner of someone who received information through the porous walls of a place she had worked for 4 years, rather than through any direct channel, was that Gordon had left the convergence with his territorial agreements intact, and his personal ambitions considerably reordered. Lady Mara had departed on the 2nd day with a formal expression of courtesy that was received with formal courtesy in return, and the particular cold space she left behind her was not, in anyone's estimation, a loss. The senior adviser, whose name was Aldrich, and who had the precise and well-organized manner of a man who had been managing the practical consequences of other people's principles for 30 years, had asked Nora formally, in Rael's presence, and with the kind of careful neutrality that indicated he had been thinking about the question for several days, whether she would be willing to remain at Veldmore in an expanded capacity. He had not specified what the capacity was. He had let the question sit, and Nora had told him she would think about it, and he had nodded as though this was the answer he had expected. She thought about it. She thought about it in the way she thought about everything that had happened since the night of the feast, not by trying to resolve it into something smaller than it was, but by holding the full size of it and waiting for her understanding of it to grow to match. 4 years. She had built something in this place, not the kind of something that appeared in records or on banners, not the kind that earned a name above its station, or a rank beyond what it had been given, the kind of something that lived inside the body of a person who has spent long enough at a work they are suited for, that the work has become part of them, inseparable from the person they have decided to be. She was good at this work. She was honest with herself about that. She was good at it in the way that is different from being adequate at it, the way that means your hands know what to do before your mind has made the decision, the way that means the room is better for your being in it, and you know how to make that true without anyone having to see it happen. She did not want to stop being good at that work, but she also did not. She discovered in the quiet honesty of the northern nights want to be invisible in it anymore. And those two things, she found, did not actually conflict. The morning she made her decision, she went to the east wing of the keep, where the Alpha King's study occupied a corner room with 2 windows, one facing the courtyard below, and one facing the mountains, and she knocked. He said to come in. She came in. He was at the desk, which held the kind of organized density of a working surface, rather than a decorative one, and he looked up when she entered with the same attention he always had, which registered her fully, and did not perform doing so. "I have thought about it," she said. He set down what he was holding. "What have you decided?" She thought about the road in October, 7 years ago, and the boy on the ground in the dark, and the fire she had built from gathered wood, and the cold that had worked its way permanently into the backs of her hands, and the merchant's cart that had come through at dawn, and the 4 years in this hall, and the serving corridor, and her name in his mouth, and the morning light through the windows, and the weight of being unseen, and the new and unfamiliar weight of the opposite, and sail on the cold stone step beside her, saying, "I thought you should know." "I am going to stay," she said, "but not as what I have been." He did not ask her to specify. He understood what she meant. She could see it in the way his expression settled, the particular quality of someone who has been waiting for an answer and has received, instead of the answer, the better thing, which is the truth underneath it. "Then stay," he said. It was a simple sentence. It held, in 3 words, the entire unspoken understanding of 2 people who had been in the same hall for 4 years, and had finally, across the complicated distance of rank and memory, and a winter road, and everything that had accumulated since, arrived at the same place. She stayed. She did not become Luna overnight. That would come later, in the slow and careful and honest way that things come when they are built rather than seized, when the 2 people doing the building are not performing the story they are in, but simply living it, making decisions day after day that accumulate into a life without being entirely planned. She learned the keep in ways she had not known it before. Not the back corridors and the serving paths and the schedule of the kitchen and the weight of a loaded tray. The other ways. The names on the maps. The agreements between packs that determined how resources were distributed along the border territories. The history of the disputes that had shaped the last 30 years of northern politics, and the places where those disputes were still not entirely settled, and the careful work required to keep them from reopening. She brought to all of it the same quality she had brought to the work of the hall. The attention that did not announce itself. The patience that did not require acknowledgement. The willingness to do a thing thoroughly and without performance, and to let the quality of it speak without narration. And in all of it, in the reading and the learning and the long mornings in the East Wing, going through records that had not been organized since the reign before Kale's, in the council sessions, she attended first as an observer, and then as someone whose observations were asked for. In the evenings when the day's formal structure had ended, and the keep settled into its quieter self, he was there. Not as a backdrop. Not as the explanation for what she was doing or the authority behind her presence. As a person. The particular person who said things plainly when he said them, and did not say them when they did not need to be said. Who moved through the world as though the ground under him was solid, and in doing so, made the ground feel more solid for everyone standing near him. Who had known her name for 4 years, and kept it with the same care that she had, without realizing it, been keeping his story. The boy on the road, the frost, the morning light, the fact of survival. 2 people who had each, in their own way, been carrying the same night for 7 years. Setting it down together felt in the end less like an ending than like the first morning of a season that had taken a very long time to arrive. Not dramatic in its arrival, just present and real and warm in the way that things are warm when they are no longer something you are waiting for. She woke in the early mornings and tied her apron strings from habit, and then remembered she did not have to, and stood in the room that had long since stopped feeling borrowed, and looked at the mountains going from black to blue to pale gold in the eastern light, and felt in her chest the particular settled quality of a person who knows where they are, not because someone put her here, because she chose it, because it turned out that being chosen and choosing were not, as she had spent a long time assuming, opposing forces. That the moment someone saw her clearly enough to say her name in a crowded hall had not diminished the choosing. It had made it possible. She had spent 4 years learning to be invisible. She spent the rest of them learning what it meant to be known. And it turned out, as the truest things tend to, that the 2 were not opposites at all. That being invisible had never been the absence of worth. It had been the waiting room, and she had waited long enough. If this story stayed with you, if there was a moment where you held your breath or felt something catch in your chest, you already know what kind of stories live here. Subscribe now, because the next one is already waiting, and it will not be smaller than this one. Hit the bell so you do not miss the moment it arrives. This channel is built for people who know that the most powerful stories are not the loudest ones. They are the ones about a person who was unseen, and a moment that changed everything. That is what we make here, every single time.